Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermont, and this is a video about Dark Souls and Demon Souls. Not long ago I made two videos talking about the mightiest of bosses in the Dark Souls and Demon Souls franchise, the humanoid knights and the more beastly monsters. And a lot of you all raised the same question: where is Black Iron Tarkus? Where is Havel the Rock? So here we are. In this video, we'll be talking about the mightiest male NPCs throughout the series, that is to say, non-boss NPCs, whether friendly or hostile. There are so many to choose from that I decided it would be the best thing to do to split this in two. One video for male NPCs, one video for female NPCs. We'll be covering Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3. As for Bloodborne, that may have to have its own separate video in the future, but let's kick things off with, you guessed it, right off the bat we've got a bit of an issue. The Monumental. These almost Buddha-esque entities are seemingly immortal and possessed of great strength. There is only one remaining by the time of the game, if we exclude the player character that is, who has the potential to become a new Monumental. But considering we have so very little to go by, we'll give them but a passing mention. Plus, I honestly don't know if we can call the Monumental male or female for that matter. They seem to have kind of reached the point where they have no need of a sex. So if we look at the remaining male characters, we've got Saint Urbane, Sage Frake, Bior of the Twin Fangs, Yurt the Silent Chief, Satsuki and Old King Doran. Those aren't all the NPCs, just those that I would consider the top few. Now of course, if you believe Ostrava or what was his name, Ariona, or someone else is worth making the list, well, let me know why in the comments. Garl Vinland was an interesting one. Whilst he is technically an NPC and not a boss, for all intents and purposes, he was the final boss of the Valley of Defilement. So I used him in the boss video, not this one. And of these remaining warriors, it must surely be Old King Doran, no? But taking him out of the mix, well, let's look at Frake and Urbane for a moment. These are the high-level trainers of soul sorcery, the soul arts, and miracles respectively. Neither of them are particularly hard to defeat when it comes to in-game, although maybe Urbane has the edge because God's Wrath can really hurt, but from a lore angle, Urbane is a little delusional, and Frake seems more capable of taking care of himself. As for the more physical fighters, I would have to give the win to Bior. He's a tough one, whether you're looking at his contributions for the story or trying to take him down yourself in-game. Bring him along with you to fight the Penetrator or the Drake, and you'll see for yourself. Thanks to his armour and shield, his defence is top-notch, and he wields a powerful weapon to boot. If you're looking to take him down, the easiest way is certainly to abuse the game mechanics, maybe poison him and then just run off. One of the Twin Fangs and brother to Valifax, Bior was one of King Alant's knights, seemingly the only one to retain his sanity. Can he hold a candle to Old King Doran? Well, that's a good question. But Doran's known as the last hero, the founding king of Politaria. His heroic deeds so great that he became a demigod, and continues to protect the royal family over the ages. Whilst he can be, well, rather lacking in AI, he's certainly one of the most powerful NPCs, not just in Demon Souls, but throughout the franchise. After all, it's not every day you come across a demigod in your travels, or at least one that isn't a boss. Oh, and where to start? Let's look at both magic users and physical fighters once again. On the magical side of things we have Big Hat Logan, of course, Aingi, and the Xanthus King, Jeremiah. Ingward is an accomplished sorcerer we can assume, but I don't think of him on the same level as the others. Aingi created Poison Mist and Toxic Mist, and if you're not sure who I'm talking about, Aingi or Aingi, or however his name is pronounced, he's the egg bearer who is hanging out by Quelaag's sister. But yes, he created Poison and Toxic Mist, which are quite terrifying spells when you think about them, but when we find him in-game, he's effectively crippled. Jeremiah, on the other hand, is able to use some of the strongest pyromancies known to exist: Chaos Storm, Chaos Fire Whip, and Chaos Fireball. Logan, on the other hand, is a genius. He created the Soul Spear, Homing Soul Mass, their crystal versions, and the Crystal Magic weapon, and then White Dragon Breath, and of course, the Tin Crystallization Catalyst. The Soul Spear, in particular, was said to be on par with Gwyn's Lightning, his Sunlight Spears. Neither Logan nor Jeremiah are much of a threat in-game, but I'd give the edge there to Jeremiah, although Logan's clearly considered one of the most powerful pure sorcerers we've ever encountered. Shame he went mad. And sometimes it's hard to judge by in-game, because, I mean, let's face it, spellcasters in Dark Souls are just a bit of a pushover. That's just how the game is. On the melee side of things, we have Hawkeye Goth, Black Iron Tarkus, Paladin Leroy, Havel the Rock, and Solaire. Of course, there's others such as Kirk, Siegmeyer, Shiva, and so on, but I think it comes down to these. Hawkeye Goth is a giant, and he thus has that going for him. If you've ever fought him, you'll know that he's not just an archer, but he has some fearsome wrestling moves at his disposal. On a quick side note, Goth and the blacksmith Andre both share wrestling moves and a connection with the giant blacksmith of Anor Londo. Perhaps one trained the other, perhaps the giant blacksmith trained both of them, perhaps Andre trained the giant blacksmith and the giant blacksmith trained Goth. Who knows? Anor Londo Wrestling Academy. Paladin Leroy and Solaire both make use of miracles, although Leroy might have the edge there. He is wielding a legendary weapons and shields, and he has higher strength. Initially he has higher health than Solaire, but by his final appearance, Solaire has evidently been pumping Vit, as by that point he edges out on health. Leroy is this game's paladin with a big ass hammer, joining the likes of Gull of Inland, Velstart, and Egon of Kareem. Havel is a famous bishop and friend of Gwyn's, or well, compatriot, using a dragon's tooth as his weapon, and wearing perhaps the most infamous heavy set of armour there is. Likewise, he is infamous for pancaking new players with devastating one-hit kills, assuming that's really him, of course. And what about Black Iron Tarkus? One of the most infamous summons throughout the series, despite having no dialogue and not a huge amount of stuff to do in the story. A knight known for his incredible strength, Tarkus is presumably a Berenique knight, and could potentially be a reference to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character, who played a small role near the end of Phantom Blood. His name could also be a reference to the song Tarkus, which could be a bit of a stretch, but there are at least two veterans in the Japanese games industry who have quoted that particular song as being a source of inspiration. Now granted, they were composers, and who knows who came up with the name for Tarkus. I feel like there might have been something in the design works about him there, but it's been a while. The Knights of Berenique, however, were known as the mightiest of the mighty, and Tarkus was renowned even amongst them. In-game, he is met only during Sen's Fortress, where he is summoned with an incredible health pool and massive defense, not to mention the ability to effectively solo the boss of the area. In fact, Tarkus is a rare situation wherein fighting him would probably be harder than fighting the boss he summoned for. If you could summon the Iron Golem to fight Black Iron Tarkus, yeah, that would probably be harder. He seems to have met his end in Anor Londo, bizarrely. Although the crestfallen merchant remarks that even Tarkus couldn't best Sen's Fortress, the armour of Tarkus is located in Anor Londo's Painting Cathedral, suggesting the merchant was either mistaken or due to convoluted time and space, Tarkus managed to proceed after aiding the player in defeating the golem. Or perhaps someone just took his armour. It would be an interesting end though. None could best Tarkus in combat, but slipping from a narrow beam to his death, there's no beating gravity, no matter how powerful you might be. Tarkus also wields a shield designed by a fan, a winner of a contest. The other winners of that contest were Sanctus, the Effigy Shield, and I believe maybe the Bloodkite Shield? The Blood Shield, I forget what it's called. So yes, Tarkus and Leroy are both wielding fan-made shields. That's interesting, isn't it? And when it comes to the first Dark Souls, I don't know, Tarkus, Goth, Pavel, one of them would take the crown as strongest of NPCs when we're looking at gameplay. But looking aside from gameplay and including the lore, I think if we combine those two aspects, it would probably have to be Havel the Rock. There are so many NPCs in this game that it's almost a little daunting when you take all those one-shot summons into account, but we'll start with magic-focused ones again. There's no doubt about this one though, it has to come down to either Strayed, Valafis, or the royal sorcerer, Navlan. A sorcerer so wise and powerful that even those who invited him to their kingdom began to fear him, Strayed was lured into a trap and imprisoned in the Bastille for some unknown amount of time. In unused and old cut content, it was suggested that Strayed assisted the king of Alafis, Alvis, in defeating a powerful ancient dragon. On top of that, and being one of two individuals capable of transmuting twisted souls into sorceries and weapons, not to mention the only human capable of doing that in the entire series, Strayed is an accomplished sorcerer and pyromancer, who created Lingering Flame, Soul Bolt, Flame Swathe, and Homing Soul Arrow, that we know of. Strayed never took an apprentice, so much of his extensive knowledge was lost, but when engaged in combat, he demonstrates many other soul sorceries at his disposal. Evidently his genius is at a level near Logan, if not beyond, for the Great Mage of Alafis even managed to perfect a spell that originally did nothing more than backfire on the caster. It is also suggested that Strayed was the man possessed of the transcendental artistry needed to create the Dispelling Ring. Unlike Logan, none of his spells are thought of to be on the level of Gwyn's miracles, but then Strayed never went insane, or he was always a little insane. If you compare his release from his petrified prison with, say, what was her name, Rosabeth? Melfia or somewhere? She was quite put out upon being freed from her prison. Strayed was largely unfazed. Navlan, on the other hand, might not be a human at all, but rather a sentient spell, immortal and moving from body to body. We know that Navlan created Darkstorm and Scraps of Life, the Hexes. We also know that Navlan was put to death long ago for the crime of seeking to restore the art of resurrection. So, who knows, perhaps he found a way to transform himself into a sentient magic, possessing the body we encounter in the game. An accomplished chaos sorcerer, Navlan will doggedly pursue the bearer of the curse if freed, invading them again and again. It's worth pointing out that Navlan is one of very few characters we can say is capable of casting magic without any form of catalyst. But then again, if he truly is a living magic, perhaps the body itself is his catalyst. But melee warriors now, Benhart of Jugo, Vengal, Transcendent Ed or Eddie, and a special mention to Maldron the Assassin, and Jester Thomas of course. Thomas is noteworthy for his ability to solo Mytha and being somewhat of a nuisance as an invader, and I suppose he's more of a spellcaster, really. He does love his pyromancy. Mordrin the assassin is perhaps not the strongest of opponents, but he's a wily sort, employing many tricks and elusive tactics to get the better of you. I'm sure he's been the cause of many deaths. Ed is a bit of a powerhouse summon, but Vengal and Benhart are perhaps the beefiest here, that we also know a little about story-wise. Benhart wields an imitation moonlight blade, but that doesn't stop him from being a very competent swordsman. Unlike Lucatiel, he has the fortitude to make it through Drangleic without losing his mind. Vengal was a mercenary who ended up losing his head and adopting a rather zen outlook on life, yet his body remains and can be fought and summoned both, demonstrating that it is quite capable, even if one of those encounters is against the ancient dragon, who melts all phantoms without much trouble. Truth be told, I can't think of any standout characters for Dark Souls 2 when it comes to melee proficiency. The bosses are something else entirely. Raim, Sir Alon, Felstart and so forth. But non-bosses? Yeah, Vengal might be the strongest, but I could easily be persuaded as to the strengths of others. What do you think? And now, the last of the trilogy. When we're talking about magic users, none of them are too impressive to me. Cornyx, or what was that other pyromancer? Cuculus of the Great Swamp? Yeah, Cornyx restored at least one pyromancy that we know of, but neither he nor Orbeck are really noteworthy in that sense. So let's move on to melee, which has a better showing. Egon of Karim, the Black Hands Kamui and Gotthard, Night Slayer Sorig, and Sir Wilhelm. There's a number of accomplished fighters in Dark Souls 3. Egon of Karim wields immense physical strength and some considerable willpower. The Black Hands are members of an extremely elite order, yet they never really achieve anything too amazing in the game. Have you ever died to Kamui? And it's not just Kamui, he's got Lion Knight Albert and, what's her name? Daughter of the Crystals, Kremheld, or something like that. Sorig is more of an immediate threat, because the Fume Ultra Greatsword he wields is a powerful thing to be on the receiving end of, shall we say. He's close enough to a Tarkus 2.0 in some ways. Sir Wilhelm is a loyal knight, but again, is there anything truly impressive he manages? Even Silver Knight Lido of the Ringed City release, despite his impressive weapon and connection to Havel, isn't too fearsome. Lidlith of Kurland is a tiny thing, but he was also a Lord of Cinder, so surely he must be possessed of some great strength, even if only strength of will. Hawkwood, Horace, the Ringfinger, there's others we could speak of, but Sorig is striking me as the mightiest of these. None is standing out to me here though, but then I'll admit I am a little biased when it comes to Dark Souls 3 NPCs, because I feel a great many of them are a little uninspired, in the sense that many of them just feel like rehashed versions of characters we've already met. As a quick aside, Dark Souls 3 has around 35 NPCs you can converse with. Dark Souls 2 had about 42. Of those, the third game had 6 callbacks: the Blacksmith, Hawkwood, Siegward, Patches, the Crow, not including NPC invaders such as Creighton and so forth. Dark Souls 2 had 4 throwbacks: Cromwell the Pardoner, Pate, Salden, and the Crows. That's being a little generous with Pate as well. I don't believe any of the NPC invaders are returning characters, although we do encounter many throwbacks in the Abyssal Dungeons. There's like a Havel in there, there's a Rickard, there's just everything in there. There's even like a Jeremiah. I suppose Dark Souls 3 just felt a bit too much like a recycled Dark Souls in some ways, when it came to NPCs. Yet there are some standouts who I really enjoy. But what about you? Did I miss your favourite, or someone obvious who is extremely powerful? Let me know. Well, how do we come to a result here? Let's pick one from each game and then imagine throwing them into a pit against each other. For Demon Souls, I am inclined to give the win to Old King Doran, but it almost feels unfair to do so, you know? If not him, then Bior. For Dark Souls, and this was the hardest for me to choose, I think it has to be Havel. It came down to him and Tarkus for me, but Havel edged out on account of his... well, he fought dragons and he has at least one miracle to work with, and more powerful weapons. Dark Souls 2, that's another tough one. It comes down to Strayed and Vengal for me. Vengal's definitely harder to fight, but Strayed's got so much going for him from a story perspective that I think I've got to give it to him. But Strayed is a pushover to fight in the game. That's just the game mechanics, Lycia notwithstanding. As for the third Dark Souls, well, Sorig definitely stands out, even if he's a Tarkus 2.0 in some ways. But you know, I can't think of any NPCs that could stand up to him, besides maybe Egon, realistically. Orbeck is a somewhat accomplished assassin, but Sorig did quite some conquering in his past days, and I feel like he wouldn't be an easy target for an assassin, so I think it has to be him. Then we've got Old King Doran, Havel, Strayed, and Sorig in an arena. Who's going to come out on top here? Well, unfortunately for Strayed, as much as I like him personally, most of the others are probably like to have some great amount of resistance thanks to their armours. Havel indeed has Magic Barrier, or Great Magic Barrier on his side, on top of his ridiculous shield and armour. One-on-one, perhaps Strayed could take Sorig, but the others I imagine would be too much for him. Sorig we know is a doughty fighter, but can he hold up against the Old King, or Havel? I feel like he might be more skilled than Havel perhaps, but even then it comes down to, could Sorig kill Havel before Havel flattens Sorig? Considering that Sorig seems content to trade blows, I think Havel would have a good chance of pancaking him. Really, you just can't trade blows with Havel, it just doesn't really work. As for Old King Doran, maybe this is another that Strayed would have a chance with, given how Doran fights, but for the most part, I think King Doran is the strongest here. Whilst, unlike Havel and Sorig, he lacks an ultra great weapon, he is wielding one of the royal brands of Boletaria, and if we're assuming there's no cheese, such as, you know, kiting him around and dropping him down a giant hole, he's one hell of an opponent. So I think I'd have to rank it Doran, Havel, Sorig, Strayed, or something to that effect. But of course, this is all subjective. There are so many variables to take into account. There's never going to be a right or a wrong answer here, but that's not really the point. It's fun to discuss these hypothetical situations. And now that I've laid this foundation here, tell me what you think down in the comments. Let's get some conversation going, as I am very interested to see what's going to be brought up. Usually it's somewhat predictable if I make these kind of videos, like who's the strongest boss. I usually have a decent idea of what's going to be brought up, but for this one, for Dark Souls 1 I had a pretty good idea, but for Dark Souls 2 and 3, and to some extent Demon Souls, I'm curious what you guys are going to come up with. Who knows, perhaps I've been overlooking something this whole time that was right under my nose. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Next time we'll cover the female warriors, and casters, and NPCs in general. Until then, you take care,